The knock on my parents' front door came exactly 5 minutes after I stepped out onto the porch and made that call. Inside, the Christmas music was still playing. Nat King Cole was singing about chestnuts roasting on an open fire. My sister Karen still had one hand braced on the dining room table, her face red and hard like she hadn't just pointed at my 12-year-old daughter and said in front of God and everybody we all know she's faking. Her son Tyler was still standing there too, half grinning, half confused, as if snatching my child's wheelchair and barking, "Just get up and walk," had been some harmless joke gone sideways. Then my father opened the door, and the whole room went silent. I'll tell you right now, I didn't plan any of that. I'm not the kind of woman who walks around waiting for revenge. I was raised in a small Ohio town where you kept your head down, paid your bills on time, brought a casserole when someone got sick, and tried not to let family business spill out where neighbors could hear. I was 55 years old that Christmas Eve, widowed for nearly 6 years, and if life had taught me anything, it was that humiliation can come dressed like a holiday and sit right down at your own mother's table. But to understand what happened that night, you have to understand what came before it. My name is Linda Carter, and for most of my life, Christmas Eve at my parents' house had been as fixed and familiar as the star on top of the town square tree. Same white colonial on Birch Lane. Same frosted wreath on the front door. Same box of old glass ornaments my mother only trusted herself to unwrap. Every year my father carved the ham, my mother made scalloped potatoes, and my sister Karen found some way big or small to remind me she still thought she'd gotten the short end of life. Karen is 3 years older than I am. Growing up, she was the beauty, cheer captain, homecoming court, the one people noticed when she entered a room. I was the dependable one. The one teachers liked, the one who remembered birthdays and balanced the checkbook without being asked. As adults, those old roles never completely left us. Karen still moved through life like it owed her a little admiration. I moved through life like I had to keep things from falling apart. Normally, that difference just made family dinners tiring, but that year everything felt sharper. My daughter Emily had spent the previous 10 months in and out of hospitals, specialists' offices, and physical therapy rooms. It started with weakness in her legs, then numbness, then long stretches where standing became difficult and walking became dangerous. After a small mountain of tests and more sleepless nights than I can count, a neurologist at Children's in Columbus finally gave us a diagnosis, a rare neurological condition that affected her lower body strength and balance. The words were clinical. The reality was not. Reality was watching your child stare at a pair of sneakers she could no longer use the same way. Reality was insurance forms, adaptive equipment, medication schedules, and trying to sound cheerful while your own heart quietly broke in the next room. Emily handled it better than I did. That's the plain truth. She was 12 with chestnut hair that never stayed in its ponytail, and those big serious eyes that seemed to take in more than a child ought to. She still laughed at silly dog videos, still loved hot chocolate with too many marshmallows, still asked me every Sunday if we could drive around to look at Christmas lights once December came. She was brave in that steady, quiet way that doesn't ask for applause. But like a lot of conditions involving chronic illness or mobility, hers didn't always look dramatic to other people. Some days she could stand for a minute or two. Some days she could take a few shaky steps with support. Other days, getting from her bed to the bathroom was enough to wear her out. That uncertainty made certain kinds of people suspicious. Karen was one of those people. She never said it outright at first. Not when Emily first got sick, not when the wheelchair came. But there were little remarks. "She looks fine to me," or "Kids bounce back faster than doctors think." Once over the phone, she told me maybe Emily needed a little less coddling and a little more pushing. I remember gripping my kitchen counter so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to ask her which medical degree she'd earned between posting beach selfies and complaining about restaurant service online. Instead, I said, "You don't know what you're talking about," and hung up before I said something worse. I considered skipping Christmas Eve altogether that year. I truly did. But my mother called 3 times in 1 week, her voice thinner than usual, saying, "Please come, Linda. It wouldn't feel like Christmas without you and Emily here." My mother was 78 then, with arthritis in both hands, and the kind of hopeful heart that always believed one more holiday might mend what the last one didn't. My father was 81, slower on his feet, but stubborn as an oak stump. They adored Emily. And Emily, despite everything, still loved Christmas at Grandma and Grandpa's house, the ceramic village on the mantel. The old Bing Crosby records, the tin of ribbon candy no one really liked but everyone expected to see. So I said yes. On Christmas Eve, I loaded Emily's chair into the back of my Subaru, tucked a casserole dish beside a wrapped gift bag, and made the hour-long drive through the gray Ohio afternoon. Snow had fallen the night before. Not a blizzard, just enough to powder the lawns and soften the edges of the road. The radio played old carols. Emily sat beside me in her red sweater looking out the window. "Do you think Grandma made that fudge with the walnuts?" she asked. "I'd bet my life on it," I said. She smiled. "Then it's going to be a good night." That smile nearly undid me. When we pulled up, my father was already on the porch in his heavy brown cardigan, waving like we were visiting from across the country instead of 2 towns over. He came down carefully to help with the ramp we kept folded in the back. My mother met us inside, smelling like vanilla and onion and that powder she'd worn since I was a girl. She bent to kiss Emily's cheek and said, "There's my best girl." For a little while it really did feel like Christmas. The tree lights glowed in the front window. The living room lamp cast that same honey-colored warmth over the old furniture. Karen had arrived before us with Tyler and her husband Doug, and there were wrapped gifts stacked under the tree with everybody's names in my mother's neat, slanted handwriting. Tyler, 16 and all elbows and attitude, barely looked up from his phone when we came in. Doug gave me a quick hello and drifted toward the football game on TV. Karen, in a fitted green sweater and too much perfume, air-kissed my cheek and said, "Linda, you made it." There was something in her tone I didn't like. Still, I ignored it. That's what women of my generation were trained to do, wasn't it? Smooth the tablecloth, refill the glasses, pretend not to hear the sharp edge in someone's voice if it might ruin the meal. Emily was cheerful through dinner. She laughed when my father made one of his tired old jokes about eating enough ham to last till Easter. She thanked my mother for making the sweet potatoes without pecans, because she knew Emily liked them that way. She even asked Tyler about school, though he answered with a shrug. I could see she was trying to be normal, trying not to take up too much space with her chair, trying not to make other people uncomfortable with what had become our daily reality. That's the thing about decent children. They often work hardest to protect the adults around them. Dessert had just been served, pumpkin pie fudge coffee all around, when Karen laid down her fork and leaned back in her chair. The room had that after-dinner looseness to it, everyone settled plates, half-finished Christmas music still humming softly in the background. Then Karen stood up, pointed straight at Emily and hissed, "We all know she's faking." Part 1. The Christmas Gathering. 1,035 words. Continue. Karen's finger stayed pointed at my daughter like a loaded accusation. For a moment nobody moved. The only sound in the room was the quiet scratch of Nat King Cole's voice coming from my mother's old record player in the living room. The song had changed to Silent Night, which felt almost cruel given what was about to unfold. Emily froze in her chair. I saw it happen in real time, the confusion first, then the embarrassment. Her shoulders pulled inward like a small animal trying to make itself invisible. "What?" she whispered. Karen didn't sit back down. Instead, she crossed her arms and looked around the table like she was waiting for applause. "Come on," she said. "We've all been thinking it." My father blinked slowly from the head of the table. "Karen," he said carefully, "that's enough." But Karen had always been the kind of person who mistook attention for validation. "No, Dad, it's not enough," she said. "Linda's been dragging this out for almost a year. Doctors this therapy, that wheelchairs everywhere. Meanwhile, the kid looks perfectly fine." My mother's fork clattered softly against her plate. "Karen," she whispered. But Karen pressed on. "I read an article about this," she continued, nodding like she was presenting expert testimony. "Kids fake illnesses all the time, especially when parents start hovering and making a big deal out of every little thing." My heart started pounding in my chest. Not because I was surprised. Because a small part of me had known deep down that Karen had been waiting for a moment like this. Emily's voice came out small. "I'm not faking." Karen shrugged. "Well, you look fine to me." Emily looked at me then. "Not crying yet? Not angry? Just confused?" "Mom." I felt something inside my chest tighten like a rope pulled too hard. But before I could speak, Tyler pushed back his chair. Now Tyler was 16, tall and lanky, with that restless teenage energy that makes boys think every room is a stage and they're the main attraction. He'd barely looked up from his phone all night, but now suddenly he seemed interested. "Seriously," he said with a laugh. He walked around the table behind Emily. I knew what he was about to do before he even touched the chair. "Tyler," I said sharply. But he had already grabbed the handles, and then he yanked the wheelchair backward. The movement was sudden and rough. The front wheels lifted slightly before slamming back down against the hardwood floor. Emily gasped. Her hands flew to the armrests as the chair jerked out from under her center of balance. "Just stand up and walk," Tyler laughed. The room exploded with noise all at once. "Tyler," my father barked. "Stop that," my mother cried. Doug muttered something under his breath. But Emily nearly fell. Her body pitched forward as the chair shifted. For a split second, her feet slipped off the footrests and her weight tipped dangerously to one side. I lunged from my seat. My hand caught her shoulder just before she slid out of the chair. Her body was trembling. I could feel it through her sweater. "Easy," I whispered, steadying her. Emily's face had gone pale. Her eyes darted around the room like she couldn't understand why everyone was suddenly looking at her. "Tyler, what the hell is wrong with you?" my father snapped. Tyler shrugged, though I noticed his grin had faded a little. "It was a joke." Karen nodded like that explained everything. "Oh, relax," she said. "If she can't stand, she'll just sit back down." Emily's hands were shaking now. "Mom," she whispered again. My mother looked horrified. "Karen, you apologize right now," she said. But Karen just rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, everyone's acting like I pushed her down a flight of stairs." "You took her wheelchair," I said. The words came out colder than I expected. The room went quiet again. Karen turned toward me. "Linda," she said in that condescending tone she'd used since we were teenagers, "if the kid can't stand, she can't stand. What's the problem with proving it?" Emily stared down at her lap. Her voice was barely audible. "Can we go home?" Those 4 words hit me harder than anything Karen had said. I looked at my daughter's face. 12 years old? A child who had already spent months learning how to adjust to a body that no longer obeyed her the way it once had. A child who had endured hospital tests, physical therapy, and long days of pain without complaining. And now she was sitting at her own grandparents' Christmas table being told she was a liar. I felt something inside me break loose, but not the way Karen expected. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the table or storm out. Instead, I slowly reached into my purse. Karen noticed immediately. "Oh, good," she said sarcastically. "Are you calling another doctor to confirm the miracle cure?" I didn't answer. My phone felt heavy in my hand. My father watched me carefully. "Linda," he asked. I stood up. "I'll be right back." Emily looked up at me with worried eyes. "Mom?" "I'm just stepping outside for a minute," I told her softly. Then I walked to the front door. Behind me, Karen let out a dramatic sigh. "This is ridiculous," she said. Cold air hit my face the moment I stepped onto the porch. The night had settled in fully now. Snow covered the yard in a quiet white blanket, and the streetlights cast soft golden halos across the neighborhood. For a second, I just stood there breathing. I could still hear voices inside through the door. Karen talking. My mother trying to calm her down. Emily's small voice somewhere in the background. My hands were shaking slightly as I unlocked my phone. I scrolled through my contacts. Then I pressed call. The phone rang twice before a calm, familiar voice answered. "Dr. Hughes?" "Doctor," I said quietly. "I'm sorry to bother you on Christmas Eve." There was a brief pause. "Linda," he said, "is everything all right with Emily?" I looked back at the house. Through the front window, I could see the Christmas tree glowing softly. And inside that warm living room, my sister was still humiliating my child. "No," I said, "it's not." Then I explained what had just happened. The accusation. The wheelchair. The laughter. Dr. Hughes listened without interrupting. When I finished, the line went silent for a moment. Then his voice came back calm but very firm. "Linda," he said, "what your nephew did could have seriously injured her." "I know." Another pause. "Is Emily safe right now?" "Yes." "Good," he said. Then his tone changed slightly. "Would you like this incident documented?" I frowned. What do you mean? There are protections for disabled minors, he explained. Removing a mobility aid can qualify as mistreatment. If you want, I can contact the county social worker on duty tonight. I stared out at the snowy street. Inside, I heard Karen's voice rise again. I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. Emily was crying now. Soft, muffled sobs. Dr. Hughes spoke gently. Linda. I closed my eyes. Then I said the only word that felt right. Yes. All right, he replied calmly. Stay where you are. I walked back inside a minute later. Nobody asked what the call was about. Karen was still arguing with my parents. Tyler had gone quiet. Emily sat with her head down, wiping her cheeks. I took my seat beside her and squeezed her hand. 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. And when my father opened it, 2 people stepped inside. Part 2. The Cruel Accusation. 1,032 words. Continue. The knock wasn't loud. Just 3 firm taps against the old wooden door. But in a house that had suddenly gone quiet, it sounded like a gavel hitting a courtroom bench. My father looked up from the table. Now who in the world, he muttered as he pushed his chair back. No one answered. Everyone just listened as his slow footsteps crossed the living room floor. Emily was still clutching my hand. I could feel the faint tremble in her fingers. Her eyes were red from crying, but she wasn't making a sound anymore. Karen, meanwhile, had that tight smile she always wore when she believed she was winning an argument. You see, she said, gesturing toward Emily. Nothing wrong with her voice. I didn't respond. I just watched the front hallway. The door opened. Cold winter air rushed into the house. Then my father's voice came confused. Oh, good evening. A woman stepped inside first. She was maybe in her early 40s, wearing a long dark coat and carrying a leather folder tucked under one arm. Behind her stood a tall sheriff's deputy in a tan uniform, snow melting off the shoulders of his jacket. For a moment my father just stared. Yes, he asked. The woman spoke politely. Good evening, sir. My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm a county social worker. The deputy nodded slightly. Deputy Collins. My father blinked again. I'm sorry. Is something wrong? From the dining room, Karen called out loudly. Dad, who is it? The social worker stepped fully inside. We received a report involving a disabled minor, she said calmly. The words traveled down the hallway like a cold wind. Everyone at the table froze. My father looked stunned. A report, he repeated. The deputy spoke gently. We just need to speak with the family for a moment. Karen stood up immediately. Excuse me, she snapped. Rachel Bennett walked into the dining room, her expression composed but serious. I'm looking for Linda Carter, she said. I raised my hand slightly. That's me. Karen's eyes snapped toward me. What did you do? I didn't answer her. Rachel Bennett stepped closer to the table and glanced around the room quickly, taking in the scene, the dessert plates, the Christmas decorations, the child sitting in a wheelchair. Her voice remained calm. We received a call from Dr. Raymond Hughes regarding a potential incident involving a mobility aid being removed from a child. Karen laughed. Actually laughed. Oh my God, she said, shaking her head. You're kidding. The deputy's eyes moved slowly to Tyler. Is that the young man? Tyler shifted in his seat. What? Rachel Bennett addressed Emily first. Hi there, she said gently. Are you Emily? Emily nodded quietly. Rachel crouched down so she was eye level with her. I'm Rachel. I just want to ask you a couple of questions, okay? Emily looked at me. I squeezed her hand. It's okay, I said softly. Rachel spoke in the calm voice people use with children who have been through too much. Emily, did someone move your wheelchair tonight? Emily hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward Tyler. Then she nodded. He pulled it, she said quietly. Rachel glanced up. Tyler, is that correct? Tyler shifted again, suddenly looking much younger than 16. I mean, yeah, he said, but it was just a joke. The deputy stepped forward slightly. A joke. Tyler shrugged. I told her to stand up. The room had gone completely silent. Rachel Bennett wrote something in her folder. Did the movement cause her to lose balance? Emily nodded again. She almost fell. My mother gasped softly. Oh, my Lord. Karen slammed her hand on the table. This is ridiculous. Rachel turned to her calmly. Ma'am, are you Karen Miller? Yes, Karen snapped. And I'd like to know why a social worker and a police officer are interrupting Christmas dinner because of a misunderstanding. Deputy Collins spoke in a voice that was steady but firm. Removing a mobility aid from a disabled individual can cause serious injury. Karen scoffed. She's not disabled. The deputy's eyes moved toward me. Ma'am, is Emily under medical care for a mobility condition? Yes, I said. Her neurologist contacted us, Rachel added. Karen's face flushed red. Oh, please. Doctors say all kinds of things to justify billing insurance. My father stood up slowly. That's enough, Karen. But Karen wasn't done. This whole thing is insane, she said. Linda calls the authorities because her kid can't handle a joke. I felt Emily's hand tighten in mine. Rachel Bennett closed her folder. Mrs. Miller, she said calmly, this is not about jokes. She looked directly at Tyler. Tyler removing someone's wheelchair even briefly can cause them to fall or sustain serious injury. Tyler's voice came out small. I didn't know. That's why we're here, Rachel said. Deputy Collins folded his arms. There won't be any arrests tonight, he said, glancing around the room. Karen let out a triumphant laugh. See, because there's nothing wrong with what happened. The deputy continued. But this incident will be documented. Karen's smile disappeared. Rachel added gently, and we will be recommending disability awareness education. Tyler stared at the floor. My mother looked like she might cry. Doug still hadn't said a word. Karen turned toward me again. You actually called someone, she demanded. Yes, I said quietly. Her voice rose. On Christmas Eve. I met her eyes. You humiliated my daughter. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. Because something had finally shifted in the room. For the first time all evening, no one was laughing. No one was defending her. And Karen realized something that people like her almost never expect. Consequences. Emily leaned against my shoulder. Her breathing had finally steadied. Rachel Bennett stood up slowly. We'll finish documenting the report, she said. The deputy nodded. But the real damage, had already been done. Not to Emily. To Karen. Because now everyone in that room had seen exactly what she had done. And no one could pretend it was a joke anymore. Part 3. The Phone Call. 1016 words. Continue. For a few seconds after Rachel Bennett finished speaking, no one in the room moved. The Christmas lights blinked quietly on the tree in the corner. Somewhere in the kitchen, the coffee maker clicked as it finished warming the pot my mother had forgotten about. But at the dining table, everything had frozen. Karen looked like someone had slapped her. Not physically, but in the way her confidence suddenly drained from her face. This is unbelievable, she said finally. Her voice was quieter now. Rachel didn't raise her voice. Mrs. Miller, we're not here to create a scene. We're here to make sure a child is safe. Karen gestured wildly toward Emily. She is safe. Rachel glanced at Emily's wheelchair. And removing a mobility aid made her safer. Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The deputy stepped closer to Tyler. How old are you, son? 16. Okay. Deputy Collins spoke in a tone that wasn't angry but carried weight. Tyler, you understand that pulling someone's wheelchair could cause them to fall. That could mean broken bones, head injury, worse. Tyler's shoulders had sunk down toward his chest. I didn't think about that. That's part of the problem, the deputy replied. Karen suddenly found her voice again. Oh, come on, she snapped. You're talking like he committed a crime. Rachel remained calm. Actions have consequences, especially when someone's health is involved. My father cleared his throat. Maybe everyone should sit down, he said weakly. But no one sat. Doug finally spoke for the first time all night. Tyler, he muttered, go stand by the wall. Tyler obeyed without arguing. It was the first smart decision he'd made that evening. Rachel turned back toward Emily. Sweetheart, can I ask you one more question? Emily nodded. Did anyone here help you after the chair was pulled? Emily looked at me. My mom caught me. Rachel wrote something down. Then she asked gently, are you hurt anywhere? Emily shook her head. Number. All right. Rachel stood up and looked at the rest of the room. For the record, she said this visit is primarily educational. Karen laughed bitterly. Educational. Yes, Rachel said calmly, because situations like this happen more often than people realize. She looked around the table. Many disabilities aren't visible. That doesn't make them less real. The words landed hard in the room, especially for Karen. Karen's face had gone pale. She looked around as if expecting anyone to defend her. No one did. Not my father. Not my mother. Not Doug. Even Tyler kept his eyes on the floor. Karen's voice softened slightly. Well, I didn't know it was that serious. The deputy raised an eyebrow. You accused the child of faking. Karen shifted uncomfortably. I was just saying what I thought. Rachel closed her folder. And now you know more. Silence settled over the room again. Then something unexpected happened. Emily spoke. Very quietly. Aunt Karen. Karen turned. Emily looked up at her. Why would I fake something like this? The question hung in the air. It wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. And that made it hurt even more. Karen stared at her for several seconds. For the first time all night, she didn't have a quick answer. My mother suddenly wiped her eyes. Oh, honey, she whispered. Karen shifted her weight awkwardly. I just thought maybe... But the sentence fell apart halfway through. Because there was no way to finish it. No way to justify humiliating a 12-year-old girl in front of her entire family. Rachel nodded slightly as if satisfied the point had finally landed. Deputy Collins and I will file a report documenting what happened tonight, she said. Karen stiffened again. A report? Yes. Karen looked panicked now. Does that mean Tyler's in trouble? The deputy spoke calmly. This is a warning, not a charge. Karen exhaled loudly. But the deputy continued. However, we will be recommending community service hours. Tyler's head snapped up. What? Rachel explained. Volunteering in a rehabilitation center or assisted living facility. Tyler stared at her. Why? So you understand what mobility loss actually means for people. Tyler swallowed. He looked toward Emily. For the first time all evening, he seemed genuinely uncomfortable. I didn't mean to hurt you, he muttered. Emily gave a small nod. Karen, however, looked furious again. You're punishing him for a joke. Rachel shook her head. Number. Then she said something that would stay with me for years. We're teaching him empathy. The room went quiet again. Karen opened her mouth. But this time Doug put a hand on her arm. Karen, he said quietly, stop. She looked at him stunned. Doug rarely challenged her. But tonight even he had reached his limit. Rachel glanced toward me. Mrs. Carter, is there anything else you'd like documented? I thought about it. About the last year. About the hospital visits. About Emily trying so hard to stay cheerful. Then I shook my head. No, I said softly. Emily leaned against me. Her voice was small. Mom, did I ruin Christmas? The question hit my chest like a stone. I kissed the top of her head. No, sweetheart, I whispered. You didn't ruin anything. Across the table, Karen finally sat down. For the first time since the night began, she looked unsure of herself. The deputy checked his watch. Well, he said, I think we've covered everything. Rachel nodded. They both turned toward the front door. My father walked them out. The door closed again a minute later. And when he came back into the dining room, no one spoke. Not Karen. Not Tyler. Not anyone. Because something had changed in that house. Something deeper than embarrassment. For the first time all night, Karen was the one who looked small. Part 4. The Silence. 1,031 words. Continue. For a long moment after the front door closed, the house stayed perfectly still. It was a strange kind of quiet, not peaceful, not comfortable. The kind of silence that settles in when everyone suddenly realizes something important has just happened, and nobody knows quite how to move forward. The Christmas music had stopped. The record had reached the end, and now the needle clicked softly against the vinyl. Click. 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 My father shuffled over and lifted the needle, his hands moving slower than usual. When he turned around, his face looked older somehow. Well, he said gently, that was unexpected. No one answered him. Karen was staring down at the table. The confidence she had walked in with earlier that evening had completely drained away. Her lipstick was slightly smudged from pressing her lips together too tightly. Tyler still stood against the wall where Doug had told him to go. 16-year-old boys usually radiate restless energy, but right then he looked like he wished the wallpaper would open up and swallow him whole. Doug cleared his throat. "Tyler," he said quietly, "sit down." Tyler moved slowly back to his chair. My mother finally spoke. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "I can't believe this happened on Christmas Eve." Her eyes moved toward Emily. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" Emily nodded. "Yes, Grandma." Her voice was soft but steady now. I could tell she was exhausted. When you live with a chronic condition, the emotional stress sometimes drains you more than the physical symptoms. Karen finally looked up. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. Doug shot her a look. "Karen," what she snapped. He leaned closer. "Just stop talking." Karen looked like she wanted to argue. Then she noticed something. No one in the room was looking at her with sympathy. Not our parents. Not her husband. Not even her own son. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. My father slowly returned to his seat at the head of the table. "Well," he said carefully, "maybe we should all take a breath." He looked toward Tyler. "Son, you understand why what you did was dangerous?" Tyler nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "Explain it." Tyler swallowed. "I pulled the wheelchair. And—" Tyler looked toward Emily. "She could have fallen." "That's right," my father said. Tyler lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry." Emily looked up at him. She studied his face carefully. Children have a way of sensing sincerity better than adults sometimes. "Okay," she said quietly. But Karen spoke again. "You don't have to apologize like you committed a crime." Doug sighed heavily. "Karen, for the love of God." But Karen kept going. "I'm just saying this whole thing got blown out of proportion." That was when my mother finally lost her patience. And believe me, my mother was not a woman who lost patience easily. She set her napkin down slowly. "Karen Elizabeth Miller," she said. Karen froze. "Because our mother only used our full names when she meant business. You embarrassed your niece tonight." Karen looked defensive again. "I was trying to be honest." "No," my mother said calmly. "You were trying to be right." Karen blinked. The words landed harder than anything the deputy or the social worker had said. My mother continued. "There's a difference." The room stayed quiet. Karen looked around, clearly hoping someone would back her up. Doug looked away. Tyler was staring at the table. My father folded his hands together. "Karen," he said gently, "sometimes when we don't understand something, the best thing to do is listen." Karen let out a frustrated breath. "So now everyone thinks I'm the villain." No one responded. Because the truth was sitting right there in the middle of the table. Emily shifted slightly in her chair. The long evening was clearly catching up with her. "Mom," she whispered to me. "Yes, honey. I'm tired." I brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face. "I know." Doug suddenly pushed his chair back. "All right," he said firmly. "That's enough for tonight." Karen looked at him in disbelief. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this conversation is over." Doug stood up. "Tyler, you're going to do the community service they recommended." Tyler nodded. "Yes, Dad." Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious." Doug looked her straight in the eye. "I am." Karen shook her head. "This is insane." Doug spoke quietly but firmly. "No. What's insane is humiliating a 12-year-old girl on Christmas Eve." Karen opened her mouth again, but this time no words came out. For the first time in as long as I could remember, Karen had run out of arguments. My father stood up slowly. "Well," he said, clapping his hands together lightly, "who wants coffee?" My mother sniffled and nodded. "That might help." But Emily tugged gently on my sleeve. "Mom." "Yes." "Can we go home?" Her voice wasn't upset anymore. Just tired. I kissed the top of her head. "Yes, sweetheart, we can go home." I looked around the table. "I think that's best." My father nodded sadly. "I understand." My mother walked over and hugged Emily carefully. "Drive safe," she whispered. Then she hugged me too. Karen didn't say a word. As I helped Emily toward the door, Tyler spoke quietly behind us. "Aunt Linda." I turned. He looked nervous. "I really am sorry." I studied his face. He meant it. "I know," I said. Then Emily and I stepped outside into the cold December night. Snow crunched under my boots as I helped her into the car. She leaned her head against the seat and closed her eyes. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered something that nearly broke my heart. "Mom, do you think Aunt Karen hates me?" I started the engine. The heater hummed softly. I looked over at my daughter. "No," I said gently. "She just doesn't understand yet." Emily nodded slowly. Then she fell asleep before we even reached the end of the street. Back inside that house, Karen was still sitting at the table. And for the first time in her life, she was beginning to realize she might have been wrong. Part 5. Consequences. 1026 words. Continue. Winter passed slowly that year. If you've lived long enough in the Midwest, you know how January and February can stretch out like a long gray hallway. The Christmas lights disappear, the snow turns from soft white to dirty piles along the curbs, and the cold seems to settle into your bones, whether you're outside or not. But inside our small house in Worthington, life kept moving forward the way it always does. Emily went back to school after the holidays. Her middle school had been supportive from the beginning ramps installed years earlier, teachers who understood that some days were better than others. She still used her wheelchair most of the time, but her physical therapy sessions continued twice a week at the rehabilitation center across town. And slowly, very slowly, her strength improved. Not in dramatic ways. Real recovery rarely looks dramatic. It looks like standing for 30 seconds longer than last week. It looks like managing 3 careful steps between parallel bars. It looks like smiling when a therapist says that's progress. Emily celebrated every small victory like it was a gold medal. Meanwhile, I tried to rebuild something inside myself that had cracked that Christmas Eve. Not anger. I'd already burned through most of that. What stayed with me longer was the memory of Emily sitting at that table, asking if she'd ruined Christmas. That question echoed in my head more nights than I care to admit. But life has a way of delivering unexpected lessons when people least expect them. Especially teenagers. About 3 weeks after Christmas, I got a phone call from someone I didn't recognize. "Hello." "Hi, is this Linda Carter?" "Yes." "This is Rebecca from Meadowbrook Rehabilitation Center." I frowned slightly. "Is Emily all right?" "Oh, yes," she said quickly. "Emily's doing wonderful in therapy." I relaxed. "Actually," Rebecca continued, "I'm calling because we've got a new volunteer who asked if Emily might be here on Tuesdays." "Volunteer?" "Yes, Tyler Miller." I leaned back in my kitchen chair. "Tyler?" Rebecca chuckled softly. "Yes, the tall boy who looks like he'd rather be anywhere else." I couldn't help smiling a little. That sounds like him. Well, she said the first day he showed up, he barely spoke, just pushed wheelchairs where we told him and stacked supplies. That also sounds like him. But yesterday, Rebecca continued, something interesting happened. "What's that?" "He spent almost an hour talking with one of our patients, Vietnam veteran, lost partial use of his legs years ago. And afterward, Tyler asked a lot of questions." "About what?" "About what it feels like," she said gently, "to have people assume you're lazy or exaggerating because they can't see what's wrong." I didn't say anything for a moment. Rebecca continued. "He asked if Emily would be comfortable seeing him here sometime." I thought about it. Then I said I'll ask her. That evening at dinner, I brought it up. Emily looked surprised. "Tyler's volunteering there." "Apparently." She thought for a moment. Then she shrugged. "That's good." "You're okay with it?" Emily nodded. He said sorry. Children can be wonderfully simple when it comes to forgiveness. Adults tend to complicate things. Over the next couple of months, Tyler kept volunteering at the rehab center. At first, he mostly pushed wheelchairs, cleaned therapy equipment, and carried trays. But gradually, something changed. Rebecca would tell me small things. How Tyler helped an elderly woman practice walking with her frame. How he stayed late one afternoon listening to a man describe the day a car accident changed his life forever. How he stopped laughing when someone moved slowly. And one Tuesday afternoon, Emily saw him there. She rolled into the therapy room while he was helping stack foam exercise blocks. They stared at each other for a second. Then Tyler rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Hey." Emily waved. "Hi." He walked over slowly. "I didn't know you came here." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Where did you think I did therapy?" Tyler shrugged. "Fair point." There was an awkward pause. Then Tyler said quietly, "I didn't understand before." Emily tilted her head. "Understand what?" Tyler looked around the therapy room, at the parallel bars, at the patients practicing careful steps, at the physical therapists encouraging them. "All of this," he said. Emily nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's harder than it looks." Tyler kicked lightly at the floor. "I was a jerk." Emily smiled faintly. "A little." Tyler nodded. "Yeah." Then he said something that surprised both of them. "Want help with your exercises?" Emily laughed. "You're not a therapist." "True," he said, "but I'm good at counting." And from that day forward, whenever their schedules overlapped, Tyler helped count Emily's repetitions during therapy. Meanwhile, life continued shifting back at the family level too. My parents called often. My mother checked in on Emily constantly. But Karen stayed quiet. Weeks passed. Then months. Until one evening in early summer, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Karen was standing on the porch. And she looked nothing like the woman who had pointed at my daughter that Christmas Eve. Part 6. The Lesson. 1018 words. Continue. When I opened the front door that evening, Karen stood there holding a small paper bag. For a second, neither of us spoke. The summer air was warm and heavy with the smell of freshly cut grass. Fireflies blinked lazily across the yard as the sun dipped low behind the maple trees. It was one of those quiet Midwestern evenings that usually made people feel peaceful. But standing face to face with my sister after everything that had happened that winter, peaceful wasn't the word I would have chosen. Karen looked different. Not physically, exactly. She still had the same styled hair, the same careful makeup, but something about her posture had changed. The confidence she usually wore like armor had softened. "Hi, Linda," she said. Her voice sounded unsure. "Hi." Another pause. Then she held up the paper bag slightly. "Is Emily home?" "She's inside." Karen nodded slowly. "I was hoping I could talk to both of you." I stepped aside and let her in. Emily was in the living room watching television, her wheelchair angled toward the couch, while she worked on one of those puzzle books she loved. The fan hummed gently overhead. When she saw Karen, she looked surprised. "Aunt Karen." Karen gave a small nervous smile. "Hi, kiddo." Emily looked at me. I gave her a reassuring nod. Karen walked a little closer and set the paper bag on the coffee table. "I brought something," she said. Emily leaned forward and peeked inside. "A book." Karen nodded. "It's about a girl who learns to adapt after an injury. I thought you might like it." Emily pulled the book out and flipped through the pages. "It looks good." Karen exhaled quietly as if she'd been holding her breath. "Good." The three of us sat there for a moment in that slightly awkward silence that comes when people know an important conversation is coming. Karen finally spoke. "Emily, I owe you an apology." Emily looked up. "For what?" Karen swallowed. "For what I said at Christmas." Emily was quiet. Karen continued. "I shouldn't have accused you of faking, and I definitely shouldn't have let Tyler treat you the way he did." Emily studied her face carefully. "Children have an incredible ability to read sincerity." Karen continued softly. "I didn't understand what you were going through, and instead of asking questions, I judged." Emily nodded slowly. "That happens a lot." Karen blinked. "It does." Emily shrugged. "Some people think if you can't see the problem, it's not real." Karen looked down. "That's exactly what I thought." Emily closed the book gently. "It's okay." Karen looked surprised. "Just like that." Emily smiled faintly. "Yeah." Then she added something that made my throat tighten. "I figured you just didn't know." Karen let out a shaky laugh. "That's a very generous way to describe it." She glanced at me. "I also owe you an apology, Linda." I crossed my arms. "For humiliating your daughter." "For humiliating you too," she said quietly. I didn't respond immediately. Karen continued. "I spent a long time thinking about that night." "What part?" "All of it." She sat down slowly in the armchair. "At first I was angry," she admitted. "I thought you overreacted." "I remember. But then Tyler started volunteering at that rehabilitation center." I raised an eyebrow. "And," Karen shook her head slightly, "something changed in him. How so? He started telling us stories about the people there. Stories. About veterans learning to walk again. About people who had strokes. About a woman who looked perfectly healthy but couldn't stand for more than a minute without pain. Karen looked at Emily, and he told me something that stuck. What was that? I asked. Karen took a breath. He said, the hardest part for most of those people wasn't the physical struggle. Emily nodded slightly. It's the way people look at you. Karen's eyes filled with regret. Yes. She looked down at her hands, and I realized I had become exactly that kind of person. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Emily spoke again. Tyler's been helping me with my exercises. Karen looked up surprised. He has... Emily nodded. He's a good counter. Karen laughed softly. That sounds like him. Then she looked at me again. I'm really sorry, Linda. This time I believed her. Not because she said the words, but because she understood the lesson behind them. I nodded slowly. Thank you. Karen wiped the corner of her eye. Then Emily said something that caught us both off guard. You can come to Christmas this year. Karen blinked. You're inviting me? Emily shrugged. Yeah. Karen laughed again, this time with genuine warmth. Well, I'd like that. 6 months later, Christmas came again. Snow covered the lawns on Birch Lane. The same white house glowed with the same old lights. But inside, something had changed. Emily still used her wheelchair sometimes, but she was stronger now. And when we arrived at my parents' house that Christmas Eve, Tyler came straight to the door. Need help? He asked. Emily grinned. Always. He carefully guided her chair inside. Karen stood nearby watching. Then she looked at me and said quietly, I should have listened instead of judging. I nodded. That's a lesson most people learn eventually. Karen smiled faintly. Better late than never. Later that evening, after dinner and presents and too much pie, Emily leaned over to me. Mom? Yes. I'm glad we came again. So am I. I looked around the room at my family, and I thought about something I'd learned the hard way. People often fear what they don't understand. But when they take the time to listen, to learn, to care, even the worst moment can become the start of something better. So if this story touched your heart tonight, take a moment to think about the people around you. Someone you know might be fighting a battle you can't see. A little patience, a little kindness, and a little understanding can change more lives than you realize. And if you believe stories like this matter, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes the strongest kind of justice isn't revenge. It's empathy. The end.